The taxi's engine coughed to life in the pre-dawn darkness, its headlights cutting through the mountain mist like twin daggers. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her sleeping 2-year-old son in her arms, unaware that the man behind the wheel had been waiting months for this exact moment. Commander Tom Mitchell watched from their modest military housing as his family disappeared into the winding roads of Hillcrest Valley, trusting in a recommendation that would soon reveal itself as the deadliest mistake of his career. 3 years had passed since that fateful day at General Hospital when Tom first met Sarah. Their whirlwind romance had blossomed into marriage within 18 months, followed by the birth of their son, Michael. When Tom received orders for a remote posting in the mountainous region near the Syrian border, Sarah had insisted on accompanying him, despite the area's reputation for insurgent activity. Hillcrest Valley was a place where shadows held secrets and every stranger could be an enemy. The small town of barely 3,000 residents clung to the mountainside like a forgotten thought, connected to civilization by a single winding road that serpentined through treacherous terrain. Public transportation had ceased operating 2 years earlier after a bus bombing that claimed 14 lives, leaving the community isolated except for private vehicles and the occasional military convoy. It was Major Harrison who had first suggested Kemal Özdemir as a reliable taxi driver. "Been using him for months," Harrison had assured Tom during their weekly briefing. "Trustworthy, knows the roads like the back of his hand, and most importantly, he's been vetted by our intelligence unit. Your family will be safe with him." Harrison's recommendation carried weight. As Tom's immediate superior and a 15-year veteran of counterinsurgency operations, his word was trusted without question. What Tom didn't know was that Harrison had been compromised 6 months earlier, his gambling debts making him vulnerable to enemy recruitment. The terrorist cell operating in the region had been patient, methodical, and now they were ready to execute their most ambitious operation yet. Kemal Özdemir appeared to be everything Harrison had promised. A man in his early 40s with weathered hands and kind eyes, he spoke decent English and had an easy manner that immediately put Sarah at ease. His taxi was well maintained, equipped with proper car seats for Michael, and he always arrived punctually for their weekly trips to the regional medical center where Sarah worked part-time as a nurse. "Mrs. Mitchell, good morning," Kemal would say with a gentle smile, always helping her with Michael's car seat and ensuring her comfort before beginning the hour-long journey through the mountains. His conversation was pleasant but never intrusive, discussing the weather, local events, or asking politely about Michael's development. To Sarah, he seemed like a blessing in an otherwise challenging posting. Tom's duties as base commander left him little time to question the arrangement. His days were consumed with patrols, intelligence briefings, and the constant vigilance required in a region where attacks could come without warning. The fact that Sarah and Michael had reliable, safe transportation to town was one less worry in a job filled with dangers he couldn't always control. What Tom couldn't see was the elaborate network of communication that surrounded each of Kemal's trips. Hidden cameras along the mountain road recorded departure and arrival times. Encrypted radio transmissions coordinated with sleeper cells in town. Every route, every routine, every habit was being documented and analyzed by enemy operatives who had infiltrated deeper into the region's infrastructure than military intelligence realized. The terrorist organization known as the Mountain Wolves had been planning this operation for over a year. Their goal wasn't just to strike at American military presence, but to send a message that would reverberate throughout the entire region. Tom Mitchell, as base commander, represented exactly the kind of high-value target that could elevate their status among affiliated groups and attract new funding for future operations. Sarah, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the dangers surrounding her weekly journeys. She had grown to trust Kemal completely, often using the travel time to rest while Michael slept in his car seat. The mountain scenery was beautiful, and she appreciated having these quiet moments away from the tension that permeated life on the military base. Michael, now walking and beginning to form his first words, had become particularly fond of Kamal, who always brought small toys or treats for the child. "Kamal," Michael would exclaim when he saw the familiar figure approaching their door, reaching out with chubby arms to be lifted and spun around. The display of affection was both genuine and calculated, designed to deepen the family's trust while providing cover for more sinister preparations. It was during the third month of this arrangement that Kamal began subtly altering their routines. "Road construction," he would explain, taking alternate routes that avoided main checkpoints. "Police activity ahead," he'd say, diverting through residential areas where surveillance was lighter. Each change seemed logical, even helpful, but was actually part of a carefully orchestrated plan to identify vulnerabilities in the region's security network. Major Harrison, meanwhile, was feeding intelligence to his handlers with increasing frequency. Patrol schedules, security protocols, personnel information, all passed along through encrypted channels to terrorist operatives who were building a comprehensive picture of the base's defenses. Harrison's debt had grown beyond his ability to repay through legitimate means, and his handlers had made it clear that cooperation was no longer optional. The breakthrough came when Harrison provided detailed information about Tom's family routine. Sarah's weekly medical center schedule, Michael's pediatric appointments, even their grocery shopping patterns, all became part of an intelligence package that would enable the Mountain Wolves to execute their most ambitious operation yet. Tom began noticing small inconsistencies around the fourth month. Radio chatter indicated increased insurgent activity along the routes Sarah traveled, yet no attacks materialized. Reconnaissance flights spotted unusual vehicle movements in areas that should have been largely empty. Most troubling, intelligence reports suggested that enemy forces had knowledge of patrol schedules that should have been highly classified. "Something's not right," Tom confided to his intelligence officer, Captain Rodriguez, the same soldier whose arm injury had led to Tom's meeting with Sarah years earlier. "They're always one step ahead of us, like they know our moves before we make them." Rodriguez nodded gravely. "I've been thinking the same thing, sir. Either we have a communication security problem, or—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The possibility of insider involvement was too dangerous to discuss openly, even in Tom's private office. Unknown to both men, their conversation was being monitored through surveillance equipment that Harrison had helped install under the guise of security upgrades. Every suspicion, every investigative direction, every countermeasure was being reported back to enemy handlers who adjusted their plans accordingly. The operation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November. Sarah had a staff meeting at the medical center, followed by Michael's routine checkup with the pediatrician. It was a trip they had made dozens of times, following a route that had become as familiar as their own neighborhood. Kamal arrived precisely on schedule, greeting Michael with his usual warmth while helping Sarah with her bags. "Beautiful morning for a drive," he commented, though dark clouds were gathering over the mountains. "Little cold, but the roads are clear." Sarah settled into the passenger seat while Kamal secured Michael's car seat with practiced efficiency. The routine was so familiar that she barely registered the small deviations. The new air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror, the slight rearrangement of the taxi's interior, the way Kamal's hands seemed to linger a moment longer than usual on the door handles. As they pulled away from the base, Tom watched from his office window, a gesture that had become habit over the months. Something felt different about this morning, though he couldn't articulate why. Perhaps it was the unusual radio silence from patrol units, or the way Harrison had avoided eye contact during their morning briefing. Maybe it was just the commander's intuition that had kept him alive through multiple deployments. The first deviation from routine came 20 minutes into the journey. Instead of taking the main highway toward town, Kamal turned onto a narrow mountain road that Sarah didn't recognize. "Construction work ahead," he explained when she questioned the route. "Local radio said it will be backed up for hours. This way is actually shorter, just more scenic." Sarah accepted the explanation, though something in Kamal's tone seemed different. More tense, perhaps, or distracted. Michael was sleeping peacefully in his car seat, and the mountain scenery was indeed beautiful, so she settled back and tried to enjoy the unexpected route through areas she had never seen before. What Sarah couldn't know was that they were now traveling through terrain that had been carefully chosen for its isolation and strategic advantages. The narrow road wound through dense forest with limited visibility, multiple escape routes for attackers, and no cell phone coverage for nearly 15 miles. Military patrols rarely ventured into this area due to its distance from main transit routes and apparent lack of tactical significance. Kamal's hands were steady on the steering wheel, but Sarah began to notice subtle signs of tension. His conversation, usually flowing easily, had become stilted and mechanical. He checked his mirrors more frequently than normal, and twice she caught him speaking quietly into what appeared to be a radio or phone, though the words were in a dialect she didn't understand. "Is everything all right?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite growing unease. "You seem worried about something." Kamal's smile, when he turned to offer it, didn't reach his eyes. "Just concentration on the road," he replied. "These mountain turns can be tricky, especially with precious cargo." The phrase, "precious cargo," would have seemed endearing under different circumstances, but something in his tone made it sound almost ominous. 25 minutes into the alternate route, Sarah's unease crystallized into genuine alarm when she spotted armed men positioned along the roadside ahead. They were partially concealed behind trees and rocks, but their presence was unmistakable to someone who had lived on military bases for years. These were not casual hunters or local militia. Their positioning and equipment suggested professional training and hostile intent. "Kamal," she said urgently, "we need to turn around. There are armed men ahead." But when she looked at the driver, his expression had changed completely. The kindly taxi driver who had earned her trust over 4 months was gone, replaced by someone whose eyes held cold calculation and dangerous purpose. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his English suddenly more precise, his accent subtly different. "We have an appointment to keep." The radio in his hand crackled to life with rapid Turkish, and Sarah realized with mounting horror that Kamal was coordinating with the armed men ahead rather than trying to avoid them. Michael stirred in his car seat, sensing his mother's tension even in sleep. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, but they were miles from help, surrounded by terrain she didn't know, with no means of communication. The carefully planned isolation that had made this route perfect for an ambush now trapped her completely. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady for Michael's sake while her mind catalogued everything she could remember from Tom's security briefings about hostage situations. Kamal's smile returned, but now it seemed predatory rather than friendly. "What we've always wanted, Mrs. Mitchell. Your husband's cooperation. You and little Michael are going to help us deliver a message that will change everything in this region." The trap that had been months in the making was finally springing shut. As the taxi approached the waiting gunman, Sarah realized that every friendly conversation, every kindness shown to her son, every recommendation from trusted military sources had been part of an elaborate deception designed to place her and Michael exactly where their enemies wanted them. Back at the base, Tom was just beginning to sense that something was wrong. Sarah's check-in calls, usually prompt and regular, hadn't come through. The medical center reported that she had never arrived for her meeting. Most alarming, Radio contact with patrols in the area had been mysteriously interrupted by what appeared to be coordinated signal jamming. It was Captain Rodriguez who first suggested the possibility that had been lurking in Tom's subconscious all morning. "Sir, what if the taxi driver isn't who we think he is?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. If Kemal had been compromised, or worse, if he had been an enemy operative from the beginning, then Sarah and Michael were not just missing. They were in the hands of terrorists who now held the most powerful leverage imaginable over the base commander. Tom's phone rang. Unknown number. International prefix. When he answered, Kemal's voice came through clearly, though now stripped of all pretense of friendliness. "Commander Mitchell," the voice said, "I believe you're looking for your family. We need to talk." The betrayal was complete, the trap perfectly executed, and Tom Mitchell was about to learn that in the deadly game of counterterrorism, trust could be the most dangerous weapon of all. As he listened to the demands being made for his wife and son's safe return, Tom realized that the enemy hadn't just infiltrated their security, they had weaponized his love for his family against everything he had sworn to protect. The real war was just beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. The voice on the phone continued with mechanical precision. "You have 24 hours to evacuate your base and withdraw all American forces from this region. In return, your wife and son will be released unharmed at the Turkish border." The line went dead before Tom could respond, leaving him staring at his phone in the deafening silence of his office. Captain Rodriguez moved immediately to the communications console. "Sir, I'm initiating emergency protocols. We can have search teams in the air within 30 minutes. But Tom held up a hand, his tactical mind already calculating the impossibility of their situation. 24 hours wasn't enough time to organize a proper rescue operation, and any hasty attempt could result in Sarah and Michael's deaths. "Wait," Tom said, his voice hollow. "We need to think this through. They wouldn't give us an ultimatum unless they were confident in their position." He walked to the wall map, studying the mountain terrain with new eyes. Every road, every possible hiding place, every strategic advantage now had to be reconsidered in light of how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered. The secure phone rang again. This time it was General Morrison from Regional Command. "Mitchell, I'm getting reports of communication disruptions in your sector. What's your status?" Tom found himself at a crossroads that would define not just his career, but his identity as both a soldier and a father. "Sir, we have a situation," Tom began, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "I need to request immediate backup and a complete security review of all personnel, including Major Harrison." The accusation against his superior officer was career suicide unless he could prove it, but Tom had moved beyond concern for military protocol. General Morrison's voice sharpened. "That's a serious allegation, Commander. What evidence do you have?" Tom looked at Rodriguez, who nodded grimly. They both knew they were about to cross a line from which there might be no return. "My family has been taken by terrorists who had inside knowledge of our operations, sir. Major Harrison recommended the taxi driver who was involved in their abduction. I believe we have a security breach at the highest levels of command." The words hung in the air like an indictment of everything Tom had trusted about his military service. 6 hours later, the base was swarming with special operations personnel and intelligence investigators. Major Harrison had been placed under arrest after encrypted communications equipment was discovered in his quarters, along with records of financial transactions that traced back to known terrorist funding sources. The depth of his betrayal was staggering. He had compromised not just Tom's family, but potentially dozens of operations over the past 8 months. But for Tom, Harrison's arrest was cold comfort. Sarah and Michael were still missing, and the 24-hour deadline was ticking away with terrifying speed. Satellite reconnaissance had identified several possible locations where hostages might be held, but each represented a high-risk assault that could end in tragedy. It was the communications intercept at hour 18 that provided the breakthrough they desperately needed. Intelligence analysts had been monitoring all radio frequencies in the region when they detected a brief transmission in Arabic, followed by what sounded like a child crying. The signal originated from an abandoned mining facility 40 miles northeast of the base. Exactly the kind of isolated location terrorists would choose for a hostage situation. "We have assets in position," the Special Operations Commander reported to Tom. "Thermal imaging shows at least 6 heat signatures in the main building, including 2 that could be your family members." Tom studied the tactical display, his military training warring with his paternal instincts. "What's the risk assessment?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. The Special Operations Commander's expression was grim. "Hi. The building has multiple exit points, limited visibility, and we have to assume the hostages are being used as human shields. Success probability is maybe 60%. 60%. In military terms, those were acceptable odds for most operations. But when the lives at stake belonged to the people you loved most in the world, 60% felt like a death sentence." Tom closed his eyes, trying to block out the image of Sarah's face, Michael's innocent laughter, the trust they had placed in his ability to protect them. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly, "there might be another option. The demand was for you to evacuate the base and withdraw forces. What if we pretended to comply?" Tom looked up, intrigued despite the desperate circumstances. "You mean fake a withdrawal?" The Special Operations Commander shook his head. "They'll be watching. Any deception would be detected quickly." But Tom was already thinking beyond conventional military tactics. "Not a fake withdrawal. A real one. We evacuate the base publicly, make it look like we're complying with their demands. Meanwhile, a small infiltration team approaches the mining facility from an unexpected direction." The plan that emerged over the next 2 hours was audacious in its simplicity. The base would indeed be evacuated, with great show and apparent reluctance, giving the impression that Tom had chosen his family over his military duty. Meanwhile, a 4-man special operations team would approach the mining facility through an abandoned mine shaft that connected to the building from underground. As military vehicles began their conspicuous withdrawal from the base, Tom found himself in the most difficult position of his career. He was gambling everything: his family's lives, his military reputation, the strategic importance of the region, on a plan that required perfect timing and more than a little luck. The phone call came at hour 23. "Commander Mitchell." Kemal's voice was filled with satisfaction. "I see your vehicles leaving the base. Very wise of you to choose family over duty." Tom gripped the phone tighter, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I've done what you asked. When will my family be released?" There was a pause, and Tom could hear muffled voices in the background, including what might have been Sarah speaking urgently in English. "Soon," Kemal replied. "Once we confirm the withdrawal is complete, they will be released at the border as promised." But Tom detected something in the man's tone that suggested the terrorists had no intention of honoring their agreement. Sarah and Michael had seen too much, knew too much, to ever be safely released. At exactly 24 hours after the initial demand, the Special Operations team breached the mining facility from below. The assault was swift and precise, catching the terrorists completely off guard. In less than 4 minutes, 5 enemy combatants were neutralized, and Sarah and Michael were secure. Tom's reunion with his family took place in a military hospital 3 hours later. Sarah was shaken but unharmed, while Michael seemed to view the entire experience as an adventure, chattering excitedly about the loud noises and running men. It would be months before the psychological impact fully revealed itself in both mother and child. "I should have known," Sarah said as Tom held her, his own hands still trembling with relief. "There were signs, little things that didn't seem right. But I trusted him completely." Tom kissed her forehead, understanding better than most how completely trust could be weaponized by those who meant harm. "The important thing is you're both safe," he replied, though privately he knew their lives had been forever changed. The innocence of their rural posting, the simple trust in local relationships, the assumption of safety and routine, all had been shattered by the revelation of how deeply enemy agents had penetrated their world. The aftermath brought commendations for the successful rescue operation, courts-martial for Harrison and his co-conspirators, and a new posting for Tom to a position where his family's security could be better guaranteed. But in quiet moments, Tom found himself wondering how many other Kamals were out there, how many other Harrisons had been compromised, how many other families might be living in trust that was actually betrayal waiting to happen. Kamal Oshdemir, it was revealed during interrogation, had been a deep-cover operative for over 3 years, his taxi service providing perfect cover for intelligence gathering and operational planning. His kindness to Michael, his courtesy to Sarah, his reliability and professionalism, all had been calculated performances designed to build the trust necessary for the operation's success. "The hardest part," Sarah confided to Tom weeks later as they prepared for their new assignment, "is knowing that his affection for Michael was real, even though everything else was a lie. Children have a way of touching people's hearts, even when those people are doing terrible things." Tom nodded, understanding the complexity of emotions that would forever color their memory of those months in Hillcrest Valley. Evil, they had learned, rarely announced itself with obvious malice. More often, it wore a friendly face, spoke with kindness, and earned trust through patience and apparent care. As their transport lifted off from the base that had nearly become the site of the ultimate betrayal, Tom looked down at the mountain roads where his family had traveled so many times in seeming safety. The landscape looked peaceful from the air, beautiful even, giving no hint of the dangers that had lurked beneath its serene surface. "Will we ever feel safe again?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that haunted both of them. Tom considered the question carefully before answering. "We'll feel different," he said finally. "More aware, more careful, maybe less trusting. But also stronger because we survived something that could have destroyed us." He squeezed her hand as Michael slept peacefully between them, unaware that his parents were already planning a future shaped by hard-won wisdom about the true nature of trust and betrayal. The mountains of Hillcrest Valley disappeared behind them, but the lessons learned there would influence every decision, every relationship, every moment of trust for the rest of their lives. In a world where enemies could wear the faces of friends, survival required not just military training, but the emotional resilience to love despite the possibility of betrayal, and to trust again even after that trust had been weaponized against them. The taxi that had carried them so many times in false security was found abandoned near the Syrian border, its interior cleaned of evidence but still carrying the faint scent of the air freshener that had marked the beginning of their final, terrifying journey. It served as a reminder that in the modern world, the greatest dangers often came not from obvious enemies, but from those who had earned our trust only to use it as a weapon against everything we held dear.